Hello. Today I want to talk about my experience with cancer 15 years ago and how it affected me and how I've overcome how I've overcome some of the conditioning that it left me with. So, let's get started. I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma when I was 18. I was also diagnosed with tuberculosis at the same time. Excuse me, my nose is itchy. Which is known apparently as lymphoma's silent partner because of the high rate of co-occurrence. Yeah, so that was fun. The way I first noticed it was when I was watching Gattaca. It was actually after I watched it. It's the only time I've watched that movie. I think it's got Keanu Reeves in it. And I was lying down when I was watching it, and when I got up afterwards, I think something shifted and I could see this big lump in my neck, which obviously made me panic, and I immediately thought that I had cancer. And I was at university at the time. It was my first year in university. I had just moved back to my hometown of Pretoria in South Africa after finishing high school in Kenya at the international school there. So I was already feeling kind of isolated and just I didn't really have the same social network that a lot of the other people had. Yeah, so it's kind of funny how I immediately assumed that I had cancer, and then a whole bunch of people told me not to worry about it and that it's obviously not cancer. And then, I started off by going to the campus doctor because that's free and I needed to go to class anyway. And he first thought it might be my thyroid, but then he basically sent me straight to a general surgeon. Well, he referred me to one to get a biopsy done, basically. And after that, it was like a little while later, I went in. My mom actually flew back to South Africa to go with me. And we went to the doctor together, and he said, no, looks like you need to have a surgical biopsy done, which was my first time having surgery. And it was right during our first round of exams as well. So I ended up missing those. And then obviously it turned out that it was cancer. And then he also told us that this was later after he said, yeah, it looks like cancer. They did some kind of culture on the biopsy that they took, and then turned out I also had TB. So yeah, it was really it was really, really scary. It was a very upsetting experience. I'm so grateful that my mom was there with me, because I think going through that alone, truly alone, is, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So my heartfelt gratitude to my mom for her support and love. Okay, so the whole reason I'm sharing this, like I said, is to just kind of go over how this impacted my life afterwards, and how it kind of, in a way, served as a catalyst for me to really do some proper introspection and reflect on my state, and how I move through life. So the first thing, let me just say how I'm gonna approach this. So I'm gonna first go over the kind of ways my trauma manifested. And then after that, I'll go back over those with how I coped with those various traumas and how I've managed to shift my perspective on them. So the first thing is loneliness and isolation. As I said in my preamble, I already felt lonely and different and I had a different accent coming from the international school. My accent has changed a lot throughout my life, so it's always been like a little bit of a signifier of difference, good or bad. Yeah, so I think it just at that time it just made me feel a lot more alone. Like I didn't have any peers like that I could speak about this stuff to, because like honestly most people just avoided me and I had a really hard time like reaching out to connect. So I did have some people that I would hang out with, but it didn't really feel like, if I can put it didn't feel like genuine connection. It felt more like they were the most accepting people in my class, so I gravitated towards them, even though we weren't really, I don't know, aligned in the type of people that we are, if I can put it that way. No shade on them or anything. I think it's more just like, yeah, I don't know how, like we aren't friends anymore, if that says anything about it, right? So anyway, yeah, so this idea of like being the girl with cancer, suddenly I didn't just have a different accent, I also had no hair. Yeah, anyway, it was really hard. So I really felt very, very isolated, very alone. I really only had my mom there with me going through it. And, that in itself was difficult because it's obviously very upsetting to a parent when something like this happens to your child. And it's kind of confusing when you're like, in like the terms of legally I'm an adult, right? But I was like so immature still and just totally incapable really of handling the situation. I was very protected as well as a child. My parents did a lot of stuff for me, so I think it left me feeling a little bit like, people have to do stuff for me. I can't just I can't act through my own volition because I'm not like capable, right? That was the kind of hidden conditioning that resulted in. So yeah, I basically just ended up feeling very alone, even when I was not alone, mentally isolated. Okay, and then the second thing is feeling powerless. Yeah, at the time I kind of embraced this optimistic denial, as in I wouldn't entertain the idea of me dying, basically. I had a really good prognosis as well, even back in those days. If it had been 20 years earlier, probably would have been a different story, because lymphoma, I know somebody who died from lymphoma recently, and that was a very grounding experience, because it just made me realize that I am very, 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 very lucky with the care that I received, even though at times it felt torturous. I survived, I am alive, and it is through the diligence of my medical team, the people who took my life in their hands and saved it, really. So yeah, you know, I just want to really express gratitude for not being dead. Um, so yeah, I really felt powerless. My coping mechanism at the time was to just laugh about having cancer, to make light of it and like downplay the situation, really, really suppressing my absolute terror and horror. It's really difficult to speak about this because it's still very painful to me, recollecting the experience and just feeling those feelings again. But I'm here sharing because I know somebody else is gonna go through this, you know, or is going through this right now. And I want that person to know that it's okay. You're not alone. I understand what you're going through. And you fucking have hope. Excuse me for cursing, but sometimes it just feels right. Yeah, so back to me feeling powerless. I didn't know how to regulate my emotions, you know, so I just squashed it all down and laughed at it like it was nothing, because that was my way of dealing with things. Yeah, so I would just basically face one thing at a time as I had to. You know, needless to say, it felt like really a lot, and I could only literally cope with one thing at a time. You know, I had to do chemo every 2 weeks, and then every other week I had to go in to see the doctor. So every week I was at the doctor for like minimum an hour, more really. When it was chemo, it was a few hours. Okay, I think enough on that. I really felt powerless and like I just had to get through it. Third thing is post this whole experience, I developed chronic anxiety, PTSD, and teeth grinding. So I grind my teeth when I sleep, and I still struggle with that. So if anybody has managed to overcome it, please tell me how, because I would love for it not to be a problem in my life, because it causes a lot of discomfort and it's harmful. And you know, I try very hard to release my tension in other ways. So yeah, I basically, the suppression of all those emotions, I think, led to the teeth grinding, because it wasn't a problem that I had before. Yeah, I actually didn't even recognize my anxiety for years until I moved out of the house and had to, you know, support myself, do everything for myself. Yeah, so there was no place to hide, and yeah, it was time to confront what was going on. Then the fourth thing that cancer left me with is fear of relapse and other major life-changing illness. Yeah, I was honestly terrified of the idea of having to go through this again. Yeah, I've mentioned my fear of needles before. I've always been afraid of needles. It's a very, very deep-seated, visceral fear that I have, that it's not even like I think about it, I just pass out. So that was just really, really, really hard for me to deal with, because it was like constant needles, you know, literally like living in a nightmare for me. yeah. And I think I was so afraid of it coming back because, firstly, the idea of having to go through it again was absolutely terrible and just horrifying. But then also, a lot of the people that were in the chemo ward with me had like gone through a relapse, and it just seemed like it's very likely to happen. So I feel, again, incredibly grateful that 15 years later I'm still in remission. Yeah, so just immense, immense, immense gratitude for that. And I try to remember that every day. Yeah, so even after my last PET scan, telling me that I don't have cancer, I remember that feeling of relief of like, oh my gosh, this whole thing is done. Even though it's never really done, I still have to go for checkups every year, which just kind of brings those feelings up again. Yeah, so I really I struggle with feeling like, I'm gonna get cancer again. If it's not the same kind, it could be something else. Maybe because of the chemo that I got, I was lucky enough not to need radiation. Yeah, I was also like terrified of getting some other incurable disease. Weirdly, specifically MS is something, I don't know why, even though people live with MS and I'm not going to say it's totally fine, but they manage, it's not a death sentence like it may once have been. Anyway, yeah, so there was that. And then I would say the final thing that really stuck with me was a type of apathy and a sense of inevitability. Yeah, so basically over time I just numbed myself because my feelings were too much for me to handle, and like they felt like they were all bad, so I pushed them down to the point where all I could actually feel was stress and anxiety. I couldn't really enjoy myself because I couldn't let go, because I was like holding on to these terrible feelings so hard, so tightly. And I think I identified with them very strongly, like this trauma, that was created out of this thing that was out of my control, I mean, it's literally my body turning against me. That's what it felt like. So yeah, it was, it felt like I couldn't even trust myself because my body's just gonna turn around and kill me, right? So basic things felt really, really difficult. And then what actually happened was that I was kind of like having a bit of a meltdown at my office job, and somebody told me to go to just like see a doctor. And I went to this doctor, and it was a GP. She basically put me on SSRIs after speaking to me for about 10 minutes, without, any kind of other suggestions, without like deeper inspection into why was I struggling with this stuff, this anxiety. Yeah, I don't really agree with that approach, I'm gonna be honest. I think at the very least, before you prescribe mind-altering chemicals to a person, maybe try sending them to some counseling or something first. So yeah, that also, it just numbed me further and made me feel like, I don't know, there was something wrong with me. Okay, so those are what I was left with. Excuse me. So 15 years later, more actually now. Ooh, bright. What has changed? I'm sitting on this little pillow, so I'm not so low. Yeah. So let me start from the top. My feeling of loneliness and isolation. I've really realized how important it is to put effort into meaningful relationships, especially when you find people that you really connect with. Yeah, you know, you gotta show them, you gotta show the universe that they matter to you, and that the relationship is worth cultivating and taking care of and stuff. You know, as a kind of, like, I would consider myself more introverted than extroverted. Connecting with people is not always that easy. It can feel very difficult, and social situations can be quite draining. Honestly, I think why is because I get overstimulated. My auditory processing gets like overwhelmed quite quickly, so the more people there are talking, the less able I am to just focus on one thing and engage with it. I need more of like a one-on-one situation to connect with people, and at that time I didn't really have it. So yeah, I think the fact that I did meet people that really feel like there's a true connection there, that really showed me that it matters to find those people and to keep them close to you and to, you know, show them that they matter, and yeah, just really just really nurture that stuff. Yeah, and also I would say that if a relationship is feeling one-sided, there's a type of, you know, there's a balancing act. You know, you gotta ask yourself, is it worth my effort when the other person doesn't reciprocate? But if it is worth it, you know, maybe it just requires a little bit of nudging to get things going again. You know, we don't know what the other person is going through, so again, it's about not projecting your assumptions onto a situation. Anyway, okay, that was a little bit of a tangent. Number two, my feeling of powerlessness. So I dealt with that really, you know, I think my actual approach of optimistic denial was quite effective at the time. And I think it gave me a lot of power being able to laugh about the situation, because it's just a way to relieve stress. And like, if you can't laugh in your day-to-day existence, it's really hard to find joy, you know, because it's like our natural expression of delight is to laugh. So it's a very healthy thing to do, I think. Yeah, so I think what I learned from that is that while you can't really control every situation, you can control your perspective and how you approach the situation. So yeah, you know, like, even though it was maybe a little bit, you know, not the best way to deal with it, it was the best way I could deal with it at the time. And what I've really learned since is that optimism isn't about always being happy or pretending that everything is great and that you don't have any problems, but it's really about seeing how the challenges in your life can really be turned around and used as opportunities for you to grow in a direction that's meaningful to you, you know, that really, really matters. Because I think also these really challenging things that we go through, they show us what really matters to us. So even though it's really painful, it's up to us to find value in it. Otherwise, it's like a wasted experience, you know. It doesn't need to be doubly negative. Yeah, because, you know, why make it even worse, right? So yeah, number 3 relates to my anxiety and PTSD. So like I said, I still struggle with my teeth grinding, although it really does seem to be a lot less intense than it used to be, because I haven't bitten a hole through my mouth guard, so I think it's a positive sign, whereas I used to get like big chunks coming out of it. Upsetting. Yeah, so while I still experience anxiety, I no longer feel like I am anxious, if that makes sense. I can experience anxiety without being consumed by it. Yeah, and what I also really learned is that anxiety isn't a condition in itself, you know, it's a symptom of something deeper. There's probably some kind of deep-seated core belief that you formed during a traumatic experience or in childhood where you feel threatened on some level. And yeah, you know, for me it was that I was powerless and that I was a victim of life. Yeah, so it really helped me to confront those beliefs and to also just learn that emotions come and go like thoughts. I think they're very unlike thoughts, which can be dishonest and confusing. I think our emotions are incredibly honest because they come from our body, and they can reveal a lot if we're willing to inspect them a little bit and go a little bit beyond the surface of what's there, you know, what seems to be there. And you know, when you grow this skill of being able to allow your feelings to flow through you instead of instead of clinging onto them, instead of trying to suppress them, instead of, you know, denying that they're there and acting like you're okay, you know, instead of that, acknowledge the feeling, you know, if you understand what's causing it, you know, like, let's say, I need to cook dinner, but I don't have any food. So I'm feeling anxious because I'm hungry and I don't have any food to cook. As a very basic example, you know. Acknowledging the feeling to yourself, I think, is really important, because that creates that bit of distance between you being the feeling versus you experiencing the feeling. So usually acknowledging the feeling that I'm having is enough for it to dispel, you know, acknowledging it and then allowing it to wash over me. And if I still feel that, I usually do some breathing exercises, and then that 100% of the time regulates my nervous system and just brings me back to a neutral state. So yeah, that was kind of how I've been dealing with that, and it really is a lot better. Like I said, I no longer feel like I'm trapped by my emotions. I feel more like they are signals I can use to move through my life in a way that feels good and that's in alignment with who I really am. Yeah. So number 4, facing the fear of relapse and the unknown. You know, I still get cold shivers when I think about having to go through this or something akin to it again. I can't pretend that I don't feel really averse to it. But I do think it's important to understand that trauma can create a negative bias in your mind, where in a way it's almost easier to assume the worst because that way you prepare yourself for it. But in many, many ways, this just robs you of all joy, right? Because you're expecting the worst all the time, and I don't really know how you would cope with that. You know, I know how I felt when I was like that. I numbed myself and I was constantly freaking out. So it really is a choice, you know. I think the actual truth of the matter is that you don't know what is going to happen until it's already happened. So there is no value in assuming something. The only value, it's not even value, the benefit, the kicker of that, I guess, is that you create an expectation which can then either be met or not met. So, you know, I think by expecting the worst, again, you try and mitigate that disappointment if things don't work out the way you actually want them to. You know, but I think it's important to question that idea that things are inevitable, that belief, because again, until something has happened, you don't know if it's going to be the worst thing of your life or the best thing that's ever happened to you. So my advice is to really just assume neither and just take it for what it is and let the experience unfold before assuming anything about it, you know? Like, why assume the worst when you really don't know? Like, again, you're creating your own dark cloud that follows you around. And that's, again, it's just no way to live. It really isn't, you know? Of course you can live that way, but, you know, I would argue that it stops you from really being yourself. Because it's not anyone's natural state to be like that. It really isn't. And you can tell me what you think all day long, but I refuse to believe that it is anyone's natural state to be fearful and, you know, assuming that everything is bad and the whole world is against you, you know. That's just an easy excuse for when things go wrong, in my opinion. And that may sound harsh, but I've been through some difficult things, and I feel like coming out the other side, I can safely say that what you make of something is the most important thing. Right, so number 5, overcoming apathy and finding meaning. Yeah, again, basically what I realized is that numbing myself is a type of death in itself, because when you can't experience emotions and the incredible array of them, you're not living life, you know, you're engaging on a very, very shallow level. Yeah, it's like, you know, it's a way to feel an empty existence because you're not really connecting with anything other than your pain and suffering, which again is a choice, you know. Like, if you believe that everything is pointless and that there's just no value in trying, why? Like, really, really ask yourself, why do I believe this? You know? And be honest and go deeper than just the first thing that comes up, because, like, again, oftentimes we would rather, in a way, be right about something bad than be proved wrong. And I think, you know, it's because, again, you're afraid of being disappointed when things don't go the way that you would like for them to go. But yeah, I think if you want to change your perspective, you need to be humble, and admit that, you know, maybe I actually don't know how this is going to turn out. Maybe I would rather be open to the possibility that exists within the unknown than assume the worst. You know, why not give yourself that chance? Why not choose hope? So cheesy, but you know what? It's true. It really is true. It's a decision. Nothing is inevitable except life and death, and those are totally normal, and they're not, you know, death isn't bad, it's a fact of life. And, you know, I think death comes in many forms, and the real question is, what do you want from your life? You know, how do you want to move through it? Do you want to feel like you are just a leaf in the wind being blown around? Or do you want to feel like, you know, you got some sails up, you can use what life's giving you to go in the direction that you desire, you know? And it all starts with changing your attitude and your perspective and your beliefs about how the world works and your life and, you know, just how things are going to turn out. Yeah. So in conclusion, I would say it's been quite a journey these last 15 years. None of this happened instantly. I really had to make an effort. I had to really show up for myself and, you know, constantly show myself that I am worth putting effort into. I am worthy because I exist. I want to show up because I am grateful to be alive. I value the chance, the second chance that I've gotten to really grow into the person that I need to be in order to take these experiences, these terrible experiences, and use them in a positive way, being able to make somebody else feel seen. Like, maybe if you're going through something really difficult, that you're not alone. Yeah, you know, I think trauma has a way of shaping most of us, but it really doesn't need to be your defining feature, you know. We can find meaning in these challenging things if we make the effort to, you know, if we choose to do it, if we take our painful experiences and use them as a type of fuel to create the existence and the type of world that really matters to us, you know? And it all starts with each of us acting with integrity and with honesty and just really being open to the ways in which we can grow. So that's me for today. I really do help. Excuse me. Been talking a long time. I really do hope that this is valuable to somebody, because, you know, like I said, I really know how painful it is to go through this kind of thing and feel like you're all alone. And I really just want whoever may be going through this to know that you're not alone. I am here if you need me. And there are many other people who have probably gone through something similar. So we're never really alone. And it's just about choosing to reach out and make that connection. And yeah, you know, you do what you can, one day at a time, and that is enough. So yeah, thank you if you've made it all the way to the end. Yeah, that's it. Hope you have a great day and take good care of yourself.